Hopefully you can. Welcome to Books and Bars. My name is Jeff Kamin. Is there anyone here for the first time tonight? You know how you could let me know? I see Charlene just raised her hand physically. Do you guys know how to raise your blue hand? I have put in the chat, if you have access to the chat down below, a little bit about how we do the Books and Bars video chat, and I will repost that right now for everyone. But what we like to do is have everyone raise their blue hand, and then I unmute you, and you can make a comment or ask your question. And I have Caitlin helping me with co-hosting tonight, and we will make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk that wants to talk. So the other way is to carry on a conversation in the actual text chat. And if there's some things you just would rather type out and put in the chat, you can do that. And we will try to get to those as much as possible, but there's usually two different conversations going on. And we try to mix the two, but that's totally fine that sometimes you can catch up on one later, because I post the video of this after the event, and sometimes I post the text chat also. So welcome. Hopefully you read the book, Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. That is tonight's book. Hopefully everyone is here for that one. A little bit about our author. She was born in 1991 in Mayo, Ireland. So she is an Irish author. She earned her BA and MA degrees from Trinity College in Dublin. While at Trinity, she was a champion debater, becoming the, I believe, #1 debater on the European continent. Her debut novel, Conversations with Friends, was published in 2017. Her second novel, Normal People, was released in 2019. It won both the Costa Award, Costa Novel Award, and an Irish Post Award. It was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, the Dylan Thomas Prize, the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Rathbones Folio Prize, and the Carey Group Irish Novel of the Year Award. Maybe you've seen the adaptation of Normal People on Hulu, and recently it was determined that Conversations with Friends will also be shot and filmed and put on Hulu by the same director of most of the Normal People series. So I think it could be pretty good. So again, welcome. I don't really have an icebreaker question tonight. I threw it out to you guys if anyone had one. So, you know, it's just an extra thing anyway to get you guys chatting. But I guess we could start with the classic of, is there anyone who just finished the book, like in the last couple hours, to join our conversation? Maybe you have the freshest take on it and you want to share with us what you thought of it. You can always start by saying how many stars you would give it on Goodreads, or something that you liked about it or didn't like, or anything. And just raise your blue hand, I'll unmute you and you can go. Hopefully you guys figured out how to do that now. I see Majel's hand is up. Majel, I'm lowering your hand. Talk to us.
This is the first time, Jeff, that I have just finished the book and was waiting for you to ask for the hot take. I just finished it at 6:59.
Awesome.
I was rushing. I missed hanging out with Evelyne and Allison and Courtney in our little like pre-group gathering. I was like, I have to finish it, everybody. I'm sorry. I think that this was a hard book for me to read, but I think that comes from the reason why I think it was hard for me was because a lot of it felt like honestly what I encounter in my day-to-day job. So right now, I'm a psychologist. I did my doctorate at the U of M, and I work right now in a college counseling center at University of St. Thomas. And just the degree to which the main character just, you know, that Frances just like struggled with vulnerability, struggled with wanting to tell people about herself, struggled with like identifying what she was actually feeling, that she just didn't know who she was, that she considered herself uninteresting, that people would give her impressions about herself that wasn't true of her. A lot of that just felt very developmentally appropriate for like a 21-year-old college student. And they're things that I see all the time when I work with college students. And so in that way, it was kind of a boring read, and a read that I struggled to be like, and was like a piece of that. She's like, you know, whatever it might be, whether it was like, I tried to describe that I was actually feeling vulnerable without using the words vulnerable. You know, like just like an example, when she was trying to tell Bobby about how she was feeling. And I was like, so, and so I walked away from this book just like, and so that's why I'm glad to be here at book club, is because I'm like, I want someone to like help me understand the and of this book. The what am I supposed to take away from it? Because to me, like I said, it was just like, okay, this is, yep, you're 21 years old. You don't know who you are. You struggle with making friends. You struggle with being vulnerable. You struggle with identifying your feelings. And some shit is happening. And you like somebody, but he's got this. It's complicated, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And so I am very much open to other people convincing me that there's a lot here that's like really deep that I need to get to. So I'm ready for that.
All right, Majel. Well, hopefully someone will help you get to that. If not, maybe others will just agree with you. But I find it interesting that, you know, you're closer in age to these characters maybe certainly than I am, and maybe than some of our other members tonight. So if you thought it was boring or didn't get something from it, I wonder if there'll be others of around your age range that'll feel the same or not. But the next hand I saw was Mark's, and maybe Mark can help you with this. So Mark, I'm asking you to unmute yourself. Talk to us, Mark.
Okay, I can't help Major out, but here's my mea culpa for this title. So I was on track to finish it. I'm sorry, Majel. I was on track to finish it. I got to the part 2, and as soon as part 2 started, I had a technological problem with my audio, and I went all the way back to the beginning. And I had it in my head that part 2 was going to be a revisiting of all of part 1 with different little variants in the second telling of the story. So I got through 2 chapters of the reset, and I'm like, nothing seems all that different here. So I don't know if Rashomon is occurring with this. So then I started part 2 in actuality, and I haven't found my stride with part 2 yet, but I really did like part 1, and I really appreciated the insight right from the start in terms of her own perception of herself, in terms of how she looks at herself kind of in the third person sometimes. So I like that perspective in terms of how insightful she's being with regard to her own kind of, I'm going to go into this situation and I'm going to like a few things about this house that I'm about to walk into. So that kind of foresight in terms of that perspective, I really liked how detailed that was and how it held through the first part of it. So looking forward to the second part after I get some momentum again, but I stalled out a little bit at the part 2 reset.
Well, luckily you only went through two chapters like that until you figured it out. That would have been a really pulling the rug out from under you if you had gone, you know, much farther and thought, and maybe even convinced yourself that there was something slightly different that you remember differently or something. Yeah, that's a different style of book if it would have been that way. So, well, I look forward to you finishing it, and maybe then you will find something that can help Majel. Who knows? We're all just trying to help her right now. That's all it is. No, I'm just glad I asked that question, because I don't always ask that first question, but it happened to work out. The funny thing is that then Majel jumped to what is usually my last question, which is what is our takeaway? And so we're right on top of it tonight. We're looking still for people who have fresh takes, and if anyone's got a takeaway and can change Majel's mind or share whatever your mind is. But I got Rebecca here. Rebecca, I'm asking to unmute you.
So I can't raise my hand, Jeff. So just put me on your list for some time.
You're in, Caitlin. This is the curse of the co-host. Just like me, I can't raise my own hand either. So, Caitlin, you're here with us right now. If you got something, go, and then we'll go to Rebecca.
So I actually wanted to respond to Majel, which is, it's funny because I had sort of a similar reaction, not to the same degree as you, because that's not my profession. But just as you were saying that, I realized that this really reminded me of my college roommate that I had. Like when I was 21, I had a roommate that, like, she was having an affair with a married guy, and she had like exercise bulimia and had really strange eating habits and was like super jealous of me. And I feel like she sort of perceived me as this like Bobby like character in her life. And so even though like I didn't I mean, the guy, like this married guy would like show up in my apartment and I would just be like, oh my God, where do I go now? It's not like I ever met his wife or anything, so I didn't have that kind of relationship, but I realized like, wow, like I found like I liked her writing, but I had a hard time getting into it. And then I look back and I'm like, oh my God, there's so many parallels. But until you spoke up, I didn't see it. And so, yeah, it reminded me of just that period of life where it's like, okay, but like, what are you going to do with this and what now? So I can't help you, but thank you for like articulating what I was feeling on some level, but wasn't able to quite say.
Okay. Thanks, Caitlin. Rebecca, are you still with us and unmuted?
I am. I am so glad I am not 21. I found this just an exhausting book. I mean, I know it's kind of, I think, one of God's jokes that he gives people who have perfect bodies imperfect brains. And then at the end of your life, you have not a perfect brain, but you certainly don't have a perfect body. And so I'm very glad, because 21-year-olds need a lot of resiliency because they make a lot of really poor decisions. And I remember this same confusion, and I was endlessly navel gazing when I was 21. I just couldn't get away from thinking about who I was as a human being and what my choices meant about me, and how did people perceive me. And I just remember it being a terrible time, and you know, in many ways, at least that's what I remember now looking back. So this book was, I mean, I think she writes really beautifully, and she is able to capture characters really well. And I guess, though, I came into this, I had watched The Normal People. I'd not read the book, but I watched the show, and that emotionally just like wiped me out. Like I had no more empathy. I had no more, it was just an exhausting, but I would say a good, they really chose some fine actors to inhabit these characters, and therefore I was really invested in them, and I stayed through the whole, I mean, I binged it. So anyway, so reading this book after watching that series, I am just very, very glad that I'm not a young person anymore.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. Angela, I see you have your hand up. Are you ready to go and talk to us?
Yeah. I really enjoyed the fact that it was, again, a fairly easy read. I flew through it. I think I sat down and read it for, 2 different nights, and that was good. I really started off not liking Bobby. I ended up not really liking Bobby. But I couldn't decide if I wanted to shake Frances or feel bad for her, or if she just needed to be like slapped up the head. I don't know. And then you're like, is it because of her family past? What makes her so, I don't know. And then even the whole affair just seemed, I was so proud of her for being so in tune with her feelings, yet acting irrationally. And I always tell people, I actually told my boyfriend when we started dating, I'm like, I'm a crazy girl, but I'm in check with my crazy. So when I start acting crazy, I'm like, I'm feeling some things that I know are not realistic, and I'm overthinking it. So just let me be crazy for like a little bit and I'll get over it. But, and so I appreciate that they portrayed her character as that person. I realize I'm doing this. I realize I'm hurting people or saying things they probably shouldn't. She'd reflect. But it was really, I would agree, Rebecca, emotionally exhausting. And you just got like, you're like, I'm so mad at you and sad for you. And it was just too much. But overall, easy read. And that was good. And it wasn't about time traveling.
I like how low the bar is right now during COVID. An easy read, not about time travel. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Angela. What I'm wondering about is, and I see some hands here, we'll get to you in a second. So Sally Rooney has actually been called the Salinger of the Snapchat generation. And she's gotten quite acclaimed for maybe something that we're not liking in this initially, and that is actually capturing what it feels like and sounds like to be a early 20 something, and maybe fresh out of college or still in school. And maybe it's hard to, depending on where you are, to look back at that and not want to, you know, put some sense into that character's head or something, knowing what you know now, but can you put yourself back into where you were at that time? And do you feel that Rooney does a decent job of capturing it? And I think one of the things that she's gotten acclaim for, and that I do think she does a good job of, is actually kind of writing the way that we have conversations now. The book is called Conversations with Friends, but the conversations, you know, this and in Normal People, they take place over, you know, text, calls, in person, you know, things that are written. They're just not like a, you know, a normal sort of what an old school conversation is. And why is it called Conversations with Friends? And is she commenting on what a conversation with a friend is like at this age, in this day and age? Just something to think about there, and think about what, I'm sure she doesn't necessarily want to have been called the Salinger of the Snapchat generation, but it's something that stuck early, and it's catchy, and it's hard not to see. She initially said she was very inspired by mostly American authors, and really into like Franny and Zoe, you know, J.D. Salinger books, before she ever went and looked at her own, you know, Irish and European literature. She kind of shunned that and wanted to read what she felt, you know, wasn't being recommended to her, and that was more American stuff. Gretchen, your hand is up. Can I unmute you, and can you talk to us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Jackson just set up my new system here, so I've been fiddling with my camera. And
is that a green screen? A green painted wall behind you? It looks like it could work.
It is a green painted wall, but it's actually just a green painted wall. It's not
okay.
And it was so backlit. I'm trying to figure out, because I will hopefully be using this when I am appearing in court tomorrow by Zoom. So
okay.
Make sure
well,
so
yeah, if you want to clear up, you know, I hope you get off. I think those charges were ridiculous. I've seen the videos, and I mean, I don't know why they arrested you.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't know. So I have read, I read Normal People. I tried to watch I just was not in the right frame of mind to binge watch the Hulu version. But I think that one of the things that Rooney does with these characters is, first of all, I think it's really pretty accurate to just, and I think we can all relate to that, whether we're 21 now in this generation or we were 21 3 or 4 years ago, or, you know, more in my case. But I think that awkwardness of relationships and how to communicate and not really understanding how to communicate is really, really true to just being that age and figuring that out, you know, in those relationships that you have when you're in your early 20s or in your teens, are just, you're kind of bad at saying what you need and what you want, and how you feel. But I think the other thing that she does, not only in this book, but in this other book, and that may be more true to this generation than what was the case in my generation, is really showing kind of how that trauma of some adverse childhood experiences has affected our young adults now. Obviously, Frances had a pretty tough situation growing up, and you can still see her in this book, you know, going home and trying to parent her dad, and he doesn't come through for her when he says he will. And, you know, you can just only imagine what went on in that relationship before her parents separated, because he's clearly, you know, a raging alcoholic and has significant mental health issues. And the trauma that she went through, I think, is a really much larger trigger for her difficulty in, you know, she probably needs a good therapist more than anything right now, and maybe some meds. So, but she does that really well, I think, both in this book and in Normal People too, with the Marianne character, that obviously that trauma and kind of comes out in little pieces, but you can really see how that affects these kids as they're trying to figure out and become adults and how to maneuver through that world and not make those same mistakes.
Thanks, Gretchen, and good luck with your case tomorrow. And if you want to, you can make it look like you're giving the weather also while you're, doing your courtroom stuff.
I'll try that. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't handle the storm front. That's coming in here. All right, Kevin. I'm asking to unmute you. Kevin, talk to us, please.
Yeah, I was wondering what people thought of the punctuation use in the book, especially the lack of quotation marks for most of the part for dialogue. I kind of liked it because it let Sally Rooney in a very sparingly actually make certain things direct quotes. Like there was a few instances where dialogue was actually in quotes. There's like that one, "fuck you in the pool," which I thought was kind of a nice effect maybe, but it didn't feel really developed. It also made the book go a lot faster, I felt, so that was a bit of a help. But yeah, just wondering, no quotes. Who liked it? Who hated it?
I could speak for myself first on that one. I generally don't like that. And I actually did the audiobook version of this, so I didn't know that until just now, but I think I had read that. I think she does the same thing in Normal People, if anyone can confirm that or not. I generally, that's not something I like, but something you said, Kevin, made me look at it in a different way and maybe appreciate it more. And that's the idea of, if you don't put quotation marks around it, can you make it more of, it was a loosely translated, that's the way I heard it, or maybe that's not exactly what they said, but this is the gist of what they said, or, you can't, if that's sort of what your point was there. But anyone else that, raise your hand if you'd like to speak on what you thought of the quotation mark aspect of it. Thank you, Kevin.
I'm gonna jump in and say, I didn't even notice.
You didn't notice?
I didn't. I mean, I might probably notice as I was reading, but it didn't even register. Like, it really doesn't bother me when there aren't quotation marks. Like, it doesn't. And I think it also can be, I don't know, it's just one of those things that if I get into a book, my brain just sort of fills it in and I don't worry about it, apparently, since it's not something that's funny. You pointed it out and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess there weren't quotation marks, but it didn't impact my experience.
That's interesting. And could it be another way in which Rooney is sort of capturing how we write and talk now, how our conversations are now, because, was she lax on any other punctuation? Anyone that, were there other places where it was just kind of like, maybe more like text speak sort of thing? I don't know. But Kara, I've got you here.
I guess to answer Kevin's question, the punctuation I didn't even notice. It didn't even occur to me to notice that was like a style that she was doing. It just felt natural to me. Maybe I read it faster because of it. The question I kept asking myself as I was reading it was thinking about the title, Conversations with Friends. I was like, are there any friends in this book? And are they having any real conversations? Or are they just kind of giving speeches to each other to show off? It just didn't seem like anyone really liked each other in the book. Which, I guess I had those relationships when I was that age as well, but I also had friends I genuinely liked and didn't constantly judge in my internal monologue. And so in that sense, I didn't relate to it. And I didn't feel like I'm that far from being 21. It feels pretty far away, but I'm still in my 20s. So I just felt it was sad. The whole book bummed me out, and I kind of kept on waiting. Part of me accepted the fact that it was bumming me out because I thought it was leading to an ending where she decides to see a therapist. I thought that everything's just keeps on going down, down, down. Frances's mental health is just terrible. Her perceptions of all the people around her are flawed. She's gonna have a breakthrough. She's gonna realize it. She's gonna get help. She needs help. And then it just ends, and she still is just gonna be in a relationship with a guy, I don't know, who I don't dislike, but who I'm just whatever. And I just found it very frustrating. So the end of the book, I just was why did I read this? What was the point of this? Why, Frances? Has anyone seen the movie Frances Ha? It reminded me a
Yes.
lot of that movie, which I didn't like.
Okay.
Frances is another character who like is an artist, and she constantly complains about being poorer than her friends, but she still has her parents paying for everything, and I found that dislikable. So I don't know. I was hoping it was going to go somewhere. I didn't like it until the end, when it just ended up with her continuing to be in an affair with like an older man, and then I was like, all right, that's life, I guess.
I think to your point about whether they're actual friends or not, I do think that she and Frances and Bobby do have a basis of a relationship and do have a friendship. It might be at times adversarial in a way, or they're like almost always trying to one up each other, or they're jealous of the other, that sort of thing, because I think there's the complication of their past relationship perhaps also being an issue for them. And but I think that isn't there at least one discussion that they have where it seems like they are there for each other when they need each other.
I feel like Bobby's there for Frances.
Okay.
Like I felt like
just
there were
one way.
examples, and it is from Frances's perspective, and so I think our perceptions of Bobby are through her. And whenever she thinks of Bobby, she does think a lot of very nice things. But I felt like every time she thought a nice thing, there was a shady thing thrown in. You know, like I feel like there was a lot of underhanded compliments towards Bobby in the book. So whenever she was like, Bobby's so great, but like, so I didn't really think Frances was like super, I don't know. I just was like, if I had a friend like Frances and I found out how she felt about things, I would feel really sad, you know? Like if I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like a friendship, but I wouldn't say it's like a very healthy friendship or a very positive friendship. And on Bobby's end, maybe there's less like self-doubt and insecurity, but I don't know. When I think about my friendships at that age, like maybe I had some that were more similar to that, but like I also had a lot of friends that I liked. I genuinely liked them, and we had fun conversations. We didn't just talk about like the state of the world, you know? And like academic stuff. I don't know. It just didn't seem like they ever had fun with each other.
All right, fair enough. Well, I hope we can have fun tonight. So, Evelyne, do you have something fun for us? I'm asking to unmute you. Even if it's not fun, Evelyne, it's just fun to see you. Evelyne, are you with us?
Hi, yes, thank you. Yeah, I do want to start out by saying I'm observing that everyone has like takes everything I don't know, I guess Frances's character and all the characters are really well and fully formed, like enough that people just, I feel like we're all taking it as she is, and like we're being allowed to analyzing who she is rather than getting you know, bogged down in the writing or anything like that, because that's how well Sally Rooney, I feel, has written these characters, which I think is pretty impressive. I'm sort of thinking about the relationship between Frances and Bobby, and what Kara was saying about how there is a lot of talk about the state of the world and where they are in it, and you know, you get these sort of clues for even the most basic conversations turn to a very heavy awareness in these young adults of the state of the world, where she's talking to Philip at some point and they're sort of complaining about their very small stipend they get at the editor's office or the press office, and Philip's like, yeah, but because we're like rich and we're white people, and like he has a full awareness of his privilege and both of their privilege within the world, which perhaps I don't know if many of us had when we were that age or as fully. And it's interesting that Frances at one point mentions that she's able to talk to Nick about things that she doesn't talk to Bobby about. And I wonder if it's a sort of pressure to minimize your own personal problems because all the rest of the problems in the world are bigger. Like, yes, my personal problems are bad, but, you know, in the grand scheme of things, you know, I still am getting an allowance from my parents, and I'm still in college, and I'm still, you know, able to focus on academics and all of these things. So why should I worry? Like, I feel sort of guilty saying these things to maybe even close friends. So I wonder if that was part of it, although it isn't elucidated in the book. And then there is also a theme of sort of the unreliable narrator that sort of comes through. And I don't know, maybe everyone else had a better perspective than I did, but I sort of fell for it. I was like, oh my God, Bobby is great. Like she is charming. She's got all these things. She's very good looking, and all these wonderful things that Frances keeps on saying over and over again. And I feel like the turning point for me on that, when I started to realize maybe there was something else there, was when a bunch of their friends, they're all in a group together, and Bobby starts going off on some sort of theme of equality or justice, and everyone else starts sort of looking at each other, I think. And the entire time, Frances is so proud of how well Bobby is crafting her responses and arguments on this subject. And you sort of are starting to get the sense that everyone else thinks Bobby's a little off her rocker, and maybe going off on a little too crazy of a rant. And that's sort of when I personally realized that maybe Bobby was, I mean, I'm sure she was a great woman, but she's not as perfect as Frances sees her. So interesting.
Thanks, Evelyn. I see Caitlin. I'm asking unmute you, Caitlin. Fellows.
Yeah, so I typically don't really enjoy reading books about affairs. I don't have a lot of patience for them. So for me, this was kind of like, you know, at first it was like, great, cool. And that's one of the things that I love about Books and Bars, because it gives me a reason to continually read books that I wouldn't maybe stick with or pick up. And what I guess I really ended up appreciating about this book is that typically when you have like a sexual affair in a book, especially one that's sort of, I guess, really truly frivolous like this and sort of immature, it often lends itself really well to a very shallow, undeveloped book that's sort of maybe fluffy and immature as well. And in some ways, you know, I think this book really left us leaving with that, okay, well, what's the point? We have a 21-year-old trying to find herself, continuously infatuated with this older guy. But for what it was actually, I found it really well executed. And I agree with Evelyn in that, you know, all of the characters were really well formed. And I think the entire book itself was really quite cohesive and quite formed kind of as a whole. And, you know, sitting, you know, when I put this book down, I finished it yesterday, I kind of was like, okay, it was well executed, enjoyable to read, easy to read. For what it was about an affair, it was actually pretty fun to read. And I didn't like the characters, but I enjoyed reading about them. But listening to everybody kind of question, okay, well, what was the point of this book? You know, I'm kind of realizing, well, perhaps that was the point. And when Bobby was going off on her monologue, she goes off on this monologue questioning whether human beings are supposed to be naturally monogamous or whether they're really supposed to be polygamous, and whether, you know, marriage is really more of a male patriarchal social construct that we've just fallen into, and that's not our natural tendency if we were left to nature. And so, you know, kind of thinking about where this sort of conversations with friends and hearing everybody think about or question, okay, well, were these really truly friends, or were those people I said were my friend or my boyfriend or my girlfriend in the past? Yeah, I'd maybe say they were friends, but then again, maybe they weren't real friends. You know, for me, I'm kind of realizing that, you know, the point of this book is to question, okay, what's the point? What's the point of a relationship? What's the point of a friendship? What's the point of marriage? And to really challenge our notions, to understand what friendship is. You know, we look at Bobby and Frances, and we look at their friendship, and they've been great friends for, you know, they go back to their grade school years, and Frances shares initially a couple of little stories. And it's sort of that, okay, well, why are you even her friend? What do they contribute to each other? And you look at their relationship now, and there's kind of a lot more of their friendship is based on tension. And it forces us to think about, okay, what is the value of their friendship to them? You know, looking at the way Frances and Nick's relationship develops, and you know, I'm again, don't typically like reading about affairs. For me, I'm not a patient person when it comes to them. Sort of like, yeah, okay, get over it. And for me, it was kind of shocking how, you know, that kind of open relationship sense and how easygoing they just all took it in stride. And not having been in that situation, maybe that's a perfectly normal response. I have no idea. But, you know, for me, it's really like, okay, that's not how I would do it, sure. But again, really forcing me to question, what is the value of that marriage? What do they give to each other? How do they make each other happy? What's the value of Frances and Nick's relationship? And Melissa kind of recognizes it, where she says, yeah, I don't want you to be sleeping with my husband, but you're making him into a better person, so please go ahead, keep doing it. I like him better now. And that affair fixes their marriage. So again, completely shattering my notions of what an affair does and what it is and how it should be. But yeah, you know, for me, I think, you know, on one level, this is kind of that just a typical fluffy coming of age girl with an affair and some identity issues book. But on the other side, when you're kind of left to question that point of, well, what's the point of this book? It really, you know, it does challenge your thoughts a lot, my thoughts at least, a lot into what does it mean to be married? What does it mean to be dating? What does it mean to be friends? That's it.
Thanks, Caitlin. Do you think that it's possible that one of the things that Rooney is showing us here is how some of the friendships that we have at that age, we do grow out of, and we realize that maybe, you know, they were friendships for a certain time, but they're not going to be ones that we move forward with because it's not good for either person in their relationship. I mean, I think back to, there's probably a lot of us that have, you know, friends from that time that we're just not friends with anymore for whatever reason. I posted something from the New Yorker. It's kind of an interesting analysis of calling this a new kind of adultery novel. And Caitlin, your comments on that made me think of that. So worth a read when you have a chance. The link is in the chat. But it also brings up something I felt, the relationship between the two women here, Frances and Bobby, reminded me a bit of Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend, which we had read for Books and Bars a while back. The Lena and Linu characters from that book. And I'm finally watching the HBO version of it, so I was just thinking of that the other day. But kind of an interesting similarity in the relationship there, where I think one views the other as being the one that is more special. We're at least in the head of the one, so we just hear how kind of they compare, you know, to the other person and are almost jealous of them in certain ways. But Allison's had her hand up for a while. So Allison, I'm asking to unmute you. Can you talk to us, Allison?
Hello.
Hi.
I liked this book. I don't know. I was going back and forth. It didn't like have a lot of depth to it, but then I was also very much thinking of this author as like she's writing in her 20s, and it very much is 20s. And the things that she's dealing with are very much things that I would like have empathy for someone like, oh, you're 20, you're in your 20s, like that is how you think at this time, you know, and like a lot of this stuff is normal, or some of the stuff that you're struggling with like could be more mental health stuff, but like a lot of people do not get help. And so I think that this story very much characterizes like a very like average, in some ways, 20-year-old with some unique experiences. So that's, I liked it because it was, you know, someone who's about to turn 40 here in November. I'm very excited and nervous about that. It very much brought me back to like 20s and people I knew in 20s and experiences in 20s. But then I also look at like who I was in 20s and who kids are now these days, like in the 20s, and they're just so much more evolved in so many ways. Like they have so many more understandings of relationships and sexuality and gender and in like relationships like that, the Nick, like their relationship, I felt like in some ways was like an open relationship, but they didn't call it that. Maybe at some point like they would, but they're older and so they don't, you know, like I think that there's just so many different things that I was impressed by for a 20-year-old perspective or a young writer that I liked. So, and I also want to say like, thank you for including a book with queer culture in it. Something's very important to me personally. And so I read a lot of queer books, and so reading the main author's bi, she, you know, is in, her closest friend is lesbian, her previous partner was lesbian, you know, and I am very critical about someone who's bi because I'm also bi, and how they're written, and do I like how different things, topics are being brought up, and I was like, okay with the character. You know, like it was okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't love all the pieces. But then I also was like, she's 20 and who knows who she'll be when she's 40. So those are some of my thoughts. Kevin, I liked how you brought up the quotation. That was a distraction for me. Sometimes I had to stop and like reread it because of the quotations in the book. Yeah, but I liked being in Dublin for a while too. That helped. Being stuck at home all the time or dealing with this stuff. So it was nice to have a little vacation too. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate it. Donna's had her hand up for a while. Donna, can I unmute you and can you talk to us?
Yeah, thanks. I love this discussion because I had so many different emotions when I was reading this book. I thought that the complexity of the characters was just absolutely fascinating. And Jeff, I did watch the interview that you had posted. You know, it's kind of a long interview with her and between her and a Irish talk show host of some sort. That was fascinating, and that New Yorker article as well. And I think she did something pretty remarkable in that she was able to portray these young people, but had so much depth to what she was able to include in her, the kind of self-analysis that Frances was doing throughout. That was annoying at times because, like somebody said earlier, you didn't know if you just wanted to slap her or say, get a therapist or whatever, but my heart just broke for her so many times. Every time she had a difficult conversation where she wasn't able to express her feelings, and then Nick or whoever, you know, usually Nick, that said something that then was hurtful to her, then she, bite her cheek, or she at one point dug a hole in her thigh, you know. I mean, she did those kind of self-destructive, self-harm things that you knew she was really in a bad way psychologically. Could not admit to him how much it meant to her to have him give her positive feedback during the sexual experiences, but then also wanted to feel like, to not act like she even cared, you know, like, oh, I don't, like none of this matters to me. But then later that night, she run it all through her mind and realized it mattered a whole lot. And so when Sally Rooney talked in the interview, and she talks a mile a minute. I mean, it was like, you could just imagine her winning a debate contest in Europe on any topic, either side, because the words just tumble out. And the book is kind of written that way too. The words just tumble out, no quotation marks, just flow. She and I think in one of her interviews talked about get in the flow. But I think she had this complex set of 4 people, because the interviewer said, well, so you have this triangle. And she said, no, it's not a triangle. It's 4. It's 4 people, and it's their interactions with each other. And each time, each encounter changes the other 3. And so it's stable to have 4, it's more interesting with 4 than it is with 3. And how she thought her character Frances was trying to rebel against the standard cliche of the triangle and the affair with the married man and so on, and realized, fought against it, but then by the end realized, no, there's some new way of looking at relationships, which I thought was a little bit mind-blowing, because by the end, when you find out that Nick's wife is totally fine, like somebody said earlier, she's fine with this affair because it makes him a happier and healthier and better person. Oh, really? And okay. And then even Bobby, who's so central, it felt to me like the whole time was, because we know they broke up before the book starts. And it was so gratifying to her. She was always wondering how Bobby was feeling about her. And that reuniting at the end, I got teary. I mean, they had that wonderful scene together where they kind of open up to each other, and it was all good finally with her and Bobby at the end. And well, guess what? Nick is going to be still part of that too. It was really an unusual look. Like Caitlin or somebody said earlier, it's like, is this a new way of looking at what's a marriage? What are friendships, and what are friendships within a marriage? And how can you be married and be outside of that as well with somebody else who you're more honest with than you are with your marriage partner? It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. And she's equally complex in normal people, which I think is phenomenal. So if anybody wants to get with younger people that grow older over time, but yeah, anyway, so interesting read. Unsettling though.
Thanks, Donna. I do think that anyone that maybe is unsatisfied with maybe what their takeaway is, or not having as much of a takeaway with conversations with friends, might feel a little more satisfied with the ending of Normal People. I don't want to ruin it, but I feel that maybe maybe she's even better in Normal People. But again, if you don't like this one, I don't know if you're going to want to read that one or not, but maybe you'll see the show. Kara's had her hand up again. So Kara, can I unmute you?
Sure. I did want to comment just because I finished this like a month ago, so some of my thoughts were missing, but Allison did bring up some points that I liked as well. I did think like the portrayal of queer relationships was like pretty good and interesting. At the very least, it felt like true to like some of my real life experiences. Like a lot of times when you're queer and dating someone, it's like different than when you're straight. Like sometimes you can like break up if you're straight and like go your separate ways. But when you're queer, the circles are so much smaller that you're gonna like see them all the time anyway. And so you're gonna stay friends. I've definitely gone on dates with people that I've been like, well, we're still gonna see each other all the time, so better just get over this. And you don't want to like lose them as a friend because they're one of like the few people in your life that has like the same experiences as you. So I also thought that that's maybe part of what it was like with Frances and Bobby. One question I did sort of have is that now, like, you know, now that I am getting farther from 21 and closer to maybe where Nick and Melissa are, I don't really get why Nick and Melissa would want to be around 21-year-olds and like invite them into their lives and be such close friends with them. Like sometimes I'm around young people like that, and some of them I do like, but the relationship I have with them is much more mentor-like. Like at my job, we'll get interns who are like 20, 21. I don't want to invite them into my house to drink with me and my adult friends. Like I talk to them and I help them, and like it's a very different relationship. It's not a relationship that's like the same as me and my peers. And so I thought it was weird how Melissa like kept inviting these like young like girls because they felt so young, like they were babies.
Yeah.
I thought it was so weird that they like invited them so thoroughly into their lives. I was like, you guys are like, I don't know, Nick and Melissa like felt young too, even though they're older than me. I was just like, I don't understand what you want out of this relationship or what you're getting out of it.
Well, my take on that would be I'm being closer to Nick and Melissa's age, that there's a certain amount of, they're approaching middle age and they're feeling, it's almost like, they're starting to feel older, and it's like this vampire almost kind of way of like, I can get some youthful energy, I can suck the life out of someone. And in a way, Melissa was kind of using them for her work also. So there was, she's the one who we maybe get the least of out of these four in a way, but it starts with her wanting to do a piece on them, right? That's kind of like the initial hook, or at least that's what they use as like why we're hanging out so much. Like she's going to do this these pictures and this story on us. And
but Jeff, I hear you, but then it brings me back to my initial question is, are there any friends in this book? Like, that's not like a good reason to like hang out with someone. Like, they're not friends if they're just like, if these are like their midlife crisis sports cars, like these 21-year-old girls, like that's not a real friendship.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Gretchen, can I unmute you? Gretchen, talk to us.
So a couple things. First of all, I have the blessed experience of experiencing younger 20-somethings on two kind of very different spectrums. So I have two kids, a new recent 21-year-old who he reported to me that his success on Monday was that he didn't puke. And then I have a 23-year-old as well. And I would say that the conversations that my 21-year-old has with his friends are not at all like the conversations that these 21-year-olds have in this book. But the conversations that my 23-year-old has with his friends, and has since he was probably 15, are very much like the conversations in this book. So I think some of that is maybe a little true to life with, we've got kids now who have so much more access to not just social media, but also just, the interwebs, and being able to access news and thoughts and information from all over the world that we didn't have I didn't have when I was that age, because, it was 1986. So I just think that there are some kids who are really do sit around and have those conversations about that, because I know they do. The 23-year-old lives with me and I hear it all the time, and I'm like, don't you guys ever talk about like dumb stuff? And they never do. So that's one perspective. I think the other thing too, that in response to Kara is that we actually have some friends who I don't really understand why they like hanging out with us, because, we're all in our 50s and they're in their 30s. But I don't know. I mean, we connect, we have some things in common. And I think at some point, age becomes not that big of a deal, depending on, where people are at with their own levels of maturity. And these 30-somethings kind of like hanging out with us better than they like hanging out with their 30-year-old friends. So it's just a weird dynamic. But I agree. I thought that there were some things about Nick and Melissa that seemed a little weird, but then I thought, well, on the other hand, I have to look at my own life and think I'm 52 and I hang out with 30-somethings, and that's completely normal.
It is normal, but I think it could be argued that a 30-something is probably more interesting than these 21-year-olds were.
But we've been hanging out with them for a lot longer than that.
Yeah,
they were 20-somethings when we.
Okay.
But they're just. I think to some degree they look at us as sort of parental figures, but on the other hand, they also look at us as their friends. And they enjoy spending time with us. And but then, you know, so do our kids. Our kids who are in their 20s like hanging around with us 50-year-old people too. They prefer that oftentimes to hanging around with their friends, which I don't know what that says about us. Maybe it speaks to my maturity level more than anything.
Sounds like it's a good time hanging with Gretchen in the green room. Well, you know,
Having my
I think
one
that's
glass of
great.
wine for the day.
You know, I realize too. I mean, the older I get, the more, yeah, it used to be that, yeah, you're friends mostly with people your own age, but at a certain point, your life just, it mixes up, and it's really interesting to see, you know, and I think it's great to have that variety and that those different perspectives and opinions, much like we have here when we're discussing something. It's good to know that 23-year-olds are having some serious conversations though, because we need some help, you know. We need someone younger than us that can help with what's going on. So, but yeah, we still got to have fun. So Angela, you're going to bring the fun, right? I'm going to unmute you and lower your hand. Talk to us, Angela.
I always bring the fun. No.
That's right.
One, I'd like to echo what Gretchen was saying. I actually have quite a few friends that are 10 to 13 years younger than me. We're incredibly close. We've been friends since they were 18, 19, 20. And my boyfriend is actually significantly younger than me. And so I think there's a lot of that maturity and things like that comes. And again, probably part of my immaturity too, like the things you want to go out and do or things like that. And so I think grouping in the age can kind of limit the scope. You also look at the life experience that we already had discussed that they've had, or at least Frances has had, and that's made her, if she's had to take care of her dad and things like that, she might have a more forward thinking or outward thinking, even though she struggles with some of those 21-year-old emotions, she still is able to have deep conversations and things like that. And people are, even though she doesn't describe herself that way, people have described her as, you know, interesting and the things she said, and she's an amazing writer. So I think all that comes out. My initial thought though was, did anybody else think it was really weird that they limited the view? It was basically, you knew Melissa had affairs somewhat early on, but you didn't realize that they were actually contemplating divorce until a lot further in, and that they were just coming out of the do we get it? And actually when they met, they had just decided we'll get divorced when it makes more sense. It was never we were necessarily getting back together, but towards the end, as you're going, this affair is getting a little bit too deep, all of this, then you realize they were at one point in time about to get a divorce over his emotional state and her infidelity and all of that. So I thought it was interesting that they waited to divulge the entire story of that until a lot closer, till probably halfway through the part 2.
Thank you. And I see we have Majel's hand. Majel, may I unmute you and lower your hand?
Well, I'm having I want to respond to so many people.
Go for it.
I definitely, one of the things I think that came up for me 100% with people who are saying it, like I first was like, why are these 30-year-olds hanging out with these 21-year-olds? What the fuck? And I'm totally on board with all of you, but I think that I'm on board with all of you that absolutely, like, developmental maturity is different from age. They often coincide. They don't have to, and they're also idiosyncratic and disorganized. So she might be developmentally older in terms of maybe, I don't know, her her outward thinking about the world and her perspective taking. That might be developmentally older, but what's still developmentally rather young is her being able to act in genuineness with what she actually feels, and or being able to be vulnerable with others. So I actually am on board with all of you, but I think what that brings up for me was I had a lot of judgments while reading this book, and there were a lot of ways in which it made me angry, of like like, yeah, when I did see the 30 somethings year olds, and then when I think I had more judgment about Nick than I did about Frances. I think that developmental age, I'm like, yeah, she's 21 years old. She really likes this guy. And then like with Nick, I'm like, oh, of course, like I know why people have affairs. Like this is the shit that I study when I tried to do some couples counseling way back when. I ended up not doing a rotation in couples counseling, but the little bit that I got there was like, oh, you have affairs because you have unmet needs, because you're unhappy, because you don't know what you want or you need, and you also are having a hard time expressing it. How do you get over an affair? You have to express your feelings to your partner. You have to decide what the two of you need. You have to compromise about what you want and then eventually decide, are we staying together or are we splitting up now that we know better about ourselves and about each other? And so like when Nick was getting in that relationship with Frances, I had so many negative judgments. I was just like, oh my God, you're 30, whatever. Can you know yourself better? Please, like, go have a conversation with your wife about if you want to have an open relationship or not. Like, have some consent. You're 30, whatever. You know what consent is. You know, and it's like, and so if anything, I'm like, okay, Rooney, you're making me feel all kinds of angry stuff about a lot of people in here. Why are you doing this? Why are you making me feel these things? Why do I want to throw this book across the room with these people doing this?
Well, yeah, it sounds like you would be good to sit down and have therapy with the characters in this book.
That's right.
I could help counsel them. Yeah.
Can I jump in again?
Yeah, of course.
After you're done.
Yeah.
Sorry, since I can't raise my hand, I just have to be obnoxious here. Man, you're just really speaking to me tonight, Majel. I mean, it's interesting because I'm in my 30s, in my early 30s, and like I'm getting divorced, and so I'm having to date again, which add a pandemic in, and it's super exciting. But found someone recently, so far so good. Lots of masked walks. But it is really interesting to think about like, oh, I'm in my 30s. Can I imagine like dating a guy in his 20s, like in his early 20s or 20s at all? Like really no. And like, I would get liked by these guys that are like 26 and I'm like, what are you like? I'm clearly not looking for hookups. Like I have a child. Like, what do you think like you're possibly going to get out of this? Like, we have nothing. Like, I'm not saying there's no man in his 20s I would ever date. And actually the guy I'm seeing is a little bit younger than me, which is weird, but like not much younger than me. And it's really hard to imagine like this 32-year-old guy, he's like the same age as me, he turns 33, which is how old I am. Like he's taking advantage of her, and maybe he's not trying to take advantage of her because yes, she kisses him, but he's the one that's supposed to have enough life like experience and perspective and maturity to be like, no, like this isn't a great power dynamic. And obviously he like ends up screwing with her head a lot, and she's not mature enough to actually articulate what any of her feelings are to him. And so she ends up kind of like blocking him out for a while and then going back to him. And like, also he's the first man she's ever slept with. Like she, and her only other sexual experiences, it seems like from what I remember, are with Bobby. So she's someone who's like relatively like new to the world of like romantic relationships. And he's supposed to be this grown up. And instead I feel like he just exploits the situation and her interest in him. And like, I remember when I was 21, I went on, they weren't even dates. Like I was interviewing this guy for the newsletter that I was an editor of. And like, we ended up like going out to dinner a couple of times. And somehow I like ended up back at this guy's apartment and nothing happened between us, but he was 30 and I was 21. And I remember feeling like, oh my God, this guy is so much older than I am. This is weird. And like, I had enough sort of wherewithal at the time to not let anything happen, or maybe he was smart enough to not push me. But I'm just looking back and I'm like, yeah, sure. Like my ex-husband is 8 years older than I am, but like I was in my mid-20s and he was in his mid-30s when we met. And even that felt like a big gap. And so I don't know, I just shouldn't be, sorry. I've had like most of a cider and now I'm tipsy, which is pathetic, but here we are. It's Books and Bars, right?
Oh, it's great.
But I also wanted to go back really quickly to like talking about, Jeff, you brought up like if we have to like the characters to like the book. And I think Evelyne brought up earlier that like the characters are so well developed that we're critiquing them as people, right? We're not even critiquing like the book is how it's written. And I didn't necessarily enjoy this book overall, but I thought it was very good. So even though I didn't necessarily connect with the characters, I felt like I understood the characters. I felt like she developed them very well. And I really think she's a very impressive writer, and I would read more of her books. Even though I found the characters themselves frustrating, that doesn't necessarily detract from my impression of her as a writer. Okay, I'll shut up now. But
No, thank you, Caitlin.
Anyway.
That was great. And enjoy that cider. And it's your
I
night
think
too.
I'm done. I don't think I
Thank
can
you.
finish it.
Well, you're safe. You're safe in your home. So
I'm safe here. I'm
yeah.
by myself here, right? Yeah, I could.
Okay.
I have to work tomorrow.
Thanks. That's a lot. And if you don't have anything more to say about the book, but you just have more questions for Caitlin, I mean, we could all, it'd be great. I think she gave us a lot to think about there. There's a lot in there. There's so many. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's really good stuff. So there's our icebreaker. If you have nothing to say about the book, Caitlin is our co-host tonight. She can just jump right in. She doesn't need to be unmuted or raise a hand. So feel free to ask Caitlin anything if she's up for it. Now that she's had a cider. So Rebecca,
I'm not sure this is such a good thing. Maybe I shouldn't have had this cider.
All right, Rebecca, talk to us.
I wanted to talk a little bit about her talent as a poet and why she was such an intriguing character to those around her. I mean, we mostly see it from her perspective, but she obviously is very successful at drawing people to her. And I have a feeling that she's one of those people that is so internal that she's a cipher, I think, to others. And so they can read into her what they want, and they want to be around her because she obviously has this amazing talent. And I know that having a creative life is a difficult one to live through, especially when you're young and you're trying to figuring out your emotional life and all those other kinds of things. I wish I felt more confidence that creative life that she had was going to sustain her and take her through this, because it was obvious that she was going to suffer some emotional issues. I mean, she was making choices that weren't necessarily going to pan out well for her in the future. Now, maybe that just gives her more to write about, and maybe that's the life of a creative person. I don't want to say that creatives deliberately chose traumatizing situations so that they can then push themselves to the limits of their emotional energy. But it felt like there was perhaps a bit of that in the writer's intent to say that it was okay because she was a creative person, and therefore she would be able to, write about, express the things that she was going through. And I'm conflicted about that, because I feel like it's giving a pass to someone who is pretty self-damaging. This is something that came up in this book, and featured much more in Normal People, was the request on the desire of the female for the male to hurt them, hit me. And that was really traumatizing in Normal People. That was one of the things that I think just absolutely slayed me. And so when it resurfaced in this book too, I thought, what is it that Sally Rooney is expressing? I mean, I guess it's probably more common than I am aware of. And I know that it's brave to bring it out and kind of normalize it or whatever, but I also felt that people who do have the behaviors that this character had are not healthy, and we shouldn't be rooting them on in the same way. So anyway, I wanted her creativity to be more balanced in her life instead of leading her into unhealthy situations.
There's some really interesting points. And one of the things I read that Rooney said about it was she initially, it took her only about 3 months to write this book. It went really quickly for her. And I don't think she did a ton of editing on it. Like it got good attention and acclaim from what it was, and editors didn't do too much with it. But one of the things they did change was it originally included some of the work, some of the written poetry. And when you do that in a book, oftentimes, it's better to maybe for you to imagine, is she good or not? What is her art like? It's better than if you just read it and then and then the statement is she saying it's good or it's bad, or because if you read it and don't think it's very good, then what is it that Rooney isn't a good poet, or is it that this character isn't really one, and there's a lot to read into there. And I think without including it, I think she wants us to believe that actually she is good at what she does. She does have talent, and I don't know if that's enough to justify, to wanting this pain, or she'll be able to use this pain to be better.
Right. Well, the thing is, she didn't even talk much about the process, about how she felt when she was creating, or what, I think I would have been satisfied with even, I went away for a day and wrote a whole bunch,
right.
And I ended up feeling, I don't know, miserable or drained or happy or exhilarated. I don't care, but it was as if all the energy of the book was about her relationships with others rather than her relationship with herself.
That's a good point. Mark's back. Maybe he finished it. Mark, can I unmute you? Were you listening on the side here? Did you finish it?
Yeah, I did not finish it, so
that's all right.
Take all of this with a grain of salt, in that I'm only a little ways into part 2. A couple of things I wanted to mention as we're talking a little bit more about some of the other issues that have come up for other people. I thought this was a very drama-less first half, at least, and so in that there's not a lot of high drama. I'm wondering if that kind of took away from people's enjoyment of it. There's every time you get to a point where you think that there's going to be something critical, it's taken away almost at the very same moment. Is the affair going to be a big deal? Well, at least in the first act, no, not a big deal. And talking a little bit about the way that these two groups come together, the couple that's a little bit older, I like to think of them as cohorts as opposed to generations, but the older couple is an older cohort with some of the, photography and straight acting that they would do in terms of kind of conventional art expression. And then you've got the spoken word people that are coming up a little bit later. And I think there's something in the dynamic of maybe Melissa feeling her own sense of guilt behind the scenes about her own adulterous behavior. And she's kind of more the driver, I think, of them coming together in the foursome and Nick's kind of off to the side. He's not really doing a whole lot. I wonder about Melissa's agency in terms of bringing this couple into the house in service of, if something were to happen, I can recognize her as kind of being a wallflower, and she might have some, Frances might have some ideation behind her to make her a stronger person, but at least she doesn't present that as much externally. And so it's kind of a controlled situation where she can kind of allow a connection between Frances and Nick. And so when it becomes an issue of there being a relationship that's off to the side, it doesn't become as loaded as it would be otherwise. And I keep struggling with why this book is titled Conversations with Friends. Is it because this all becomes kind of more friendly and we can just kind of get over it because we can all be friends in the end? Again, I'm only a little way through part 2, but at least getting through the first half, there's not a huge amount of tension that for me kind of, made it anything more than a walk in the park as opposed to something with a lot of stakes.
Thank you, Mark. I'm interested in if anyone else has any ideas whether is it ironically named that, or are we supposed to, feel something differently? I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. My initial take being that this is sort of like what modern conversations are like for good or for bad, even though there might be sort of a lack to something lacking in them. But I'm interested in if anyone's got any takeaways yet, now that we're, over an hour into this. We didn't have, that was our first and second question up top. So after our discussion now, do we have any takeaways? Feel free to share them. But Kara, I'm unmuting you. Talk to us.
I didn't actually realize my hand was up, but I feel like I have been thinking about your question, Jeff. So I think like a thought I had, and I had this like kind of after I read it too, but also as we're discussing it, I think a potential takeaway is that this could be like a rejection of the general narrative of like a coming of age, where like you have this defining moment and now like you're an adult. Because life isn't really like that. Like you're never really, you know, have like an awakening and really change as a person. Like stuff happens slowly over time. I don't know, development isn't literary. And so I don't know, maybe that's a takeaway. Like stuff happens to her, but she's like, in the end of the book, she's still kind of where she was at, where she began. And why wouldn't she be? She's still 21, you know? Like, why would she have this big life-changing thing happen to her and then just become a completely different person?
And then, but we look at, you know, Nick is in his mid-30s, and is he doing that much better? I mean, he's still struggling with a lot of these same things, right? I mean, they're in a relationship together, and they're going to go back to it. Probably is the way the ending leads us to believe.
And I'm turning 29 next week, 30 next year, and I don't know that I'm like where I thought. Who knows? Our 30s, like the adult year. The closer I get, the less I think they are. So, you know, I guess I do have empathy for Melissa and Nick and being like, they're not really adults. They're still only in their 30s. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess a takeaway, I don't know if it's an intentional takeaway, but I do feel, whether it's satisfying or not, I do feel like Frances's growth or lack thereof is pretty realistic. If she had like kind of found herself at 21, she'd be pretty unique.
Yeah. I like the idea of the rejecting the coming of age tag, and actually saying that, you know, there isn't just one defining event or an age where all of a sudden, you know, you got it, you know. That's an interesting take. I like it. Donna.
Just on that, just on that coming of age thing, I think there were some steps taken. However, I thought they'd grown a little bit, but one thing I love about this group is that people bring so many different background experiences and expertise, and whether it's in personal life or professional life. And I have a question for Majel. You know, in your work with young people of this age and their hangups and so on, I'm just curious what you feel might be the future for Frances. I mean, I know you mentioned earlier that you've dealt with 21-year-olds who are going through some of this craziness or this uncertainty about themselves and defining themselves, but there were some scenes that were almost heartbreaking. I mean, when she talked about what she couldn't even talk about when she found out she had endometriosis, good Lord, what a horrible, horrible, painful illness. And yet couldn't talk about it. She didn't want people to even see her as a ill person. You know, it was like that was just not, she was always so concerned what other people thought of her. So she was so protective of that. And is there, in the meanwhile, she's doing those, you know, the self-harm and so on. And I mean, what did you think of that? I mean, is there light at the end of the tunnel for her? And at the end, her inviting Nick to come pick her up, is that like the worst thing to do? Or is there something healthy that can come out of that? I mean, I'm asking Majel for her professional expertise.
Yep, and now I'll ask Majel if I can unmute her, and she wants to address that. Majel, are you still, are you with us?
I take this as my solemn duty that you all as taxpayers paid for my PhD. So I am happy because I went to a public school. I absolutely think that there is hope without question for Frances. I think I agree with the idea that, you know, growth is certainly not this quick. Maybe I think it's a great idea that it's like in real people and in real life, our growth is a lot more slower than a defining event and like, oh, I've reevaluated how I feel the world. So, how I feel about the world. So I do think that her growth is small, but we actually see it in the book with the fact that she's able to tell Bobby how much her breakup hurt her. That last conversation she has with Nick uses quite a bit more like I statements and feeling words than the very beginning. So I do think that there's actually quite a lot of hope at the end of this tunnel. I absolutely see people growing in their ability to be more vulnerable, to be more aware of their feelings. I think she has unfortunately a background where she probably had to learn to be protective about her feelings, given both of her parents. And so that makes a sense about why she always doesn't know what she feels or always feels like she should say what she's actually feeling, or that sometimes her behavior has to actually be different than what she's feeling. That was probably protective for a lot of the different things that were going on in her background. But without question, there's hope for her, absolutely. And I've seen people change, and it looks amazing. And also, we have another mental health professional. I will say, Allison. She's also she works much younger. She works in schools, but we've got another mental health professional here too. And I hope she agrees with me. I don't know. You can decide if you want to talk Allison or not, but absolutely.
I love it. Once again, we really are talking about these characters as though they are real people. So no matter what we thought of the book, I think we should admit that, to her credit, Sally Rooney has written some very believable characters here, because I mean, we're literally asking for online, like, curbside consultations here on their psyche, and asking them almost for, you know, to get professional opinions on the future for these characters. So I think I see a couple hands here. Evelyne, your hand is up, and of course, Allison, if you want to address anything, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll get you in here too. Evelyne, can I unmute you?
Hi. I just want to go back to the takeaway a little bit. I don't know if there is a takeaway other than to sort of maybe elucidate or expand our definitions of the two words in the title, like friends and conversation. The reason it makes me think about that is, I guess, the closest thing that comes to a titular phrase in the book is a paragraph I'm going to read right now. It's towards the end. It's almost at the end. Marion saw us holding hands in college one day and said, "You're back together." We shrugged. It was a relationship, and also not a relationship. Each of our gestures felt spontaneous, and if from the outside we resembled a couple, that was an interesting coincidence for us. We developed a joke about it, which was meaningless to everyone, including ourselves. What is a friend? We would say humorously. What is a conversation? So, you know, I don't know. It's sort of one of those Schrodinger's cat things. Like, if you look at it, it sort of disappears. You know, maybe just let things be what they are. And maybe that's what's happening at the end when Frances asks Nick to come. Like, she's not thinking beyond anything. She's just like, let's things be what they are. And, you know, there was a breakthrough there, right? When she was able to talk about her disease with, you know, the people closest to her. She wasn't hiding herself. She was making herself vulnerable. That's huge character development. I think she realized that she can rely on those around her to at least support her. Frances can, even if they can't provide actual concrete help for her disease.
Thanks, Evelyne, and thank you for reading that section and for giving us almost the titular line. I love it when anyone reads a part of the book, and also, of course, when we point out the titular line, because if you're reading that and someone else is near you and you get to the titular line in a book, you yell titular line and you punch on the arm like Punch Buggy, the person closest to you, even if you don't know them. That's just, it's a way to get more people to come to Books and Bars. So thank you for doing that. Kevin, can I unmute you and can you talk to us?
Yeah, so on the topic of treating the characters like real people, there's a little interview in the back of the physical copy of the book with Sally Rooney, where she goes, "People often accuse me of talking about my characters as if they're real people. Truly an unfortunate habit, and my only defense is that, to me, they are."
There you go. Perfect. Perfect. So true. Anyone else have something that you would love to hear us discuss about the book tonight, or any questions or anything that's come up that we haven't addressed yet, or anything on Conversations with Friends, Sally Rooney, anything? Thank you in advance for your tips, and please sign up for August 11th. We're on a Tuesday instead of Wednesday for the next one. It's Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. I think you'll really enjoy that one. It should make for a great discussion. And then I put in the chat a list of all of our selections through November. But guess what? I am thinking about doing even more. There's all these books that I'm like, you know what? I want to do that, but I feel like I can't make it be like an official Books and Bars pick. This is why I can just do it like another time. I'll just throw it up in a few weeks and say, hey, guess what? We are going to talk about Lord of the Rings. If you guys want to talk about it, you know, that kind of a thing. So instead of belaboring it and making such a big deal out of it, it'll be like a totally extra credit bonus, even in addition to these two. So be ready for some surprises. I will give everyone at least advance notice so that I'm not the only one in these discussions if any of these come up. But if you're really interested in joining us for even more events and you want some insider tips on what we might be reading, I'll share that with you if you want to know. But anyone else on Conversations with Friends? Anything? Any questions? Do you guys feel more inhibited or less inhibited when we have a conversation like this? If you're a person who doesn't normally talk in person at Books and Bars, are you speaking more here online, or is it the other way around? Anyone want to speak to that? I see there are some people who I think they don't speak at either version, and I was hoping that maybe they would feel comfortable to speak online, and I want you guys to all feel comfortable doing that. So if you can't find the blue hand, you can, we'll help you. Anyone else want to speak to that? Caitlin, as my co-host, who is one cider in, do you have anything that you want to impart with us before we leave you tonight? I don't have to press any buttons for you to speak.
I think I might have said enough. Since I have the approximate alcohol tolerance of a flea. No, I really enjoyed how we all seem to talk about these characters as if they were real people, which it seems like it's interesting to see, like, having, you know, attended many Books and Bars over the years, like how sometimes we get really caught up in the writing, and tonight it was very much we were caught up in who these people were. And it did sort of feel like, yeah, these are people I could have, you know, like I could have met in my 20s. And so I feel like it really speaks well of her as a writer, and her ability
Thank you for that.
to create these. Yeah.
That's a great point. Well, thank you guys. And the video that Donna was talking about, I had posted on our Facebook page. If you're not on Facebook, I can share it on Twitter or Instagram or somewhere else. Or if you just want to email me at booksandbars@gmail.com, I can send you the link if you haven't seen it. It's worth a watch if you're interested in an in-depth discussion with Sally Rooney. But thanks again, and I will see you Tuesday, August 11th for Such a Fun Age. So good night, and thanks for coming to Books and Bars.